The vital signs on Karina's monitoring device plummet. Her four-fingered hands tremble against the translucent screen as the temperature in her son's sealed compartment drops to deadly levels. The Iridian mother collapses to her knees on the cold metal floor of the malfunctioning scout vessel, a keening wail escaping her scale-covered throat. Her son is dying, and there's nothing her advanced technology can do about it, until a human steps forward. "I can save him," says Chris Shaw, rescue technician with the Interstellar Emergency Response Team. His voice breaks through the hiss of failing life support systems. "But I need to do it now." The year is 2157, and this unplanned encounter in the asteroid belt of Alpha Centauri marks humanity's first contact with the Iridians, though not by either species' design. The human transport ship detected the distress signals from the alien vessel just hours ago, finding it drifting powerless among the debris field, atmospheric systems failing and temperatures dropping to dangerous levels. Chris boarded against explicit protocols. At 34, he's experienced enough to know the risks of entering an unknown alien craft, but the faint biosignatures triggered something more powerful than caution. What he found inside was Karina, frantically trying to override the emergency seals on a quarantine compartment where her 6-year-old son remained trapped. The lockdown protocol activated during system failure, Karina explains through the universal translator, her voice breaking as she points to the sealed door. "It cannot be overridden for 48 hours. She gestures to the monitoring device. "Life support is failing. He has minutes, not hours." Chris studies the ship schematics on a nearby console. For Iridians, whose physiology cannot tolerate temperatures below 5 degrees C for extended periods, the dropping temperature spells certain death. According to the ship's logs, the compartment will reach that threshold within 3 hours, but the boy's weakening vital signs suggest he doesn't have nearly that long. "Your people have been watching us?" Chris asks, noticing scientific data about human colonies on the ship's still functioning data banks. Karina nods, her scaled skin reflecting the emergency lights. "We classified humans as dangerous after studying Earth's history of warfare. This mission was to evaluate your expansion into the system." The irony isn't lost on Chris. The species that labeled humans as threatening now depends on one to save a child's life. The only way in is from outside, Chris decides, studying the ship's design. "I need to manually override the system by accessing the external maintenance panel." His comm unit crackles with a warning from his own ship. "Shaw, asteroid activity is increasing in your sector. Any EVA is extremely high risk." Chris ignores it, already moving toward the airlock where his EVA suit waits. The monitor behind him shows the boy's life signs growing fainter. Karina believes her son is already dead. Her posture and continued wails tell him as much, but Chris knows better. The signature is weak but present. "I need specific access codes and override sequences," Chris says, pulling on his helmet. "And I need them now." Karina looks up, confusion and desperate hope battling across her alien features. In all their observations of humans, the Iridians had documented aggression, unpredictability, and warfare. Nothing in their extensive studies had prepared her for this. A human risking his life to save a child he's never met, from a species that considers his kind a threat. As the airlock begins to cycle, Chris checks his oxygen levels and tether systems. Outside, the asteroid field that had crippled the Iridian vessel continues its deadly dance. The EVA will be extraordinarily danger-roused, but through the viewport, he can see Karina watching him, clutching the monitor that tracks her son's fading life signs. Some things transcend species. And Chris Shaw is about to show the watching universe what humans do when a child's life hangs in the balance. Chris studied the external schematics on his wrist display, mind racing through variables as he prepared for the EVA. Standard procedure wouldn't cut it, not with a child's life bleeding away by the minute. "I need to reinforce this suit," he muttered, moving swiftly to the emergency supplies. He grabbed the hull-patching material, a polymer composite designed for emergency repairs that hardened to near-indestructible levels when activated. Working with practiced precision, he applied the material to critical sections of his suit joints, oxygen system housing, and chest plate. "That asteroid field tore through their hull effortlessly," he said, checking the seal on his helmet. "This isn't much, but it's better than nothing." His comm crackled again. "Shaw, we've got your trajectory plotted. ETA to external access point, 12 minutes. Chris studied the navigation data and frowned. Too long. He traced an alternative path with his finger. "I can cut directly through this narrow channel and be there in under 5. Negative. Debris density makes that path suicidal. I'll use the maneuvering thrusters for precision control." Chris didn't wait for a response. He tapped commands into his suit interface. Linking neural response system to ship AI. A cool female voice filled his helmet. Neural link established. Monitoring vitals and positioning for emergency technician Shaw. Christopher J. Karina watched from behind the airlock viewport, her scaled features barely recognizable as the alien equivalent of hope. The monitor she clutched showed her son's life signs continuing their downward spiral. "I will transmit schematics to your system," she said, voice wavering through the translator. "The access codes, send them now," Chris interrupted, stepping into the airlock. "I'll need them the second I reach that panel." The airlock cycled, outer door sliding open to reveal the void. Before him, the asteroid field stretched in chaotic patterns, chunks of rock tumbling at varying velocities. Beyond that, just visible against the backdrop of space, was the external maintenance hatch. Chris launched himself from the airlock, firing his maneuvering thrusters in short, controlled bursts. The neural link allowed for instantaneous response. Thinking left sent him left. A mental command to decelerate instantly cut his momentum. A baseball-sized rock shot past, missing his helmet by centimeters. "Warning, elevated heart rate detected," the AI announced. "No kidding," Chris muttered, twisting to avoid a larger fragment. He threaded through the narrow gap, the asteroid field dense enough that he could have reached out and touched multiple rocks simultaneously. Using his thrusters to bank sharply around a slowly rotating mass, Chris propelled himself towards the maintenance panel. Impact. Something struck his left side, sending him spinning. The neural link compensated, thrusters firing automatically to stabilize his trajectory. A second impact hit his right leg, harder this time. Warning lights flashed in his helmet display. The oxygen recycler's housing had cracked, its efficiency dropping rapidly. Oxygen reserves at 56%. Estimated remaining supply, 30 minutes. Chris reached the hull and engaged his magnetic boots, adhering to the Iridian vessel's exterior. Before him sat the access panel, sleek, organic-looking technology unlike anything in human engineering. The circuits formed intricate patterns that resembled neural pathways more than electronic components. "I've reached the panel," he reported, scanning the alien tech. "But this is nothing like our systems." He pressed his gloved hand against what appeared to be an activation node. Nothing happened. Inside the vessel, Karina had recovered from her momentary breakdown, her maternal instinct driving her to action. She moved to a secondary console, frantically searching through the ship's damaged database. Information scrolled past her four-fingered hands as she searched for anything that might help. "The external access requires Iridian biological verification," she transmitted, her translator struggling with the technical terms. "The security system needs blood-me-blood-toe recognize authorized override." Chris processed this information. "You need to send me a sample." "Is there an emergency toolport nearby?" Karina scanned the ship's layout. "Yes, 3 meters port side from your current position. Extract a sample and get it there. Now." While Karina worked inside, Chris carefully maneuvered along the hull to the small airlock designed for passing tools during maintenance. This external port was barely larger than his forearm, but it would suffice. His comm unit crackled with a new voice. "Technician Shaw, this is Commander Vega." The tone was crisp, authoritative. "Long-range sensors detect a massive asteroid fragment on collision course with your position. Impact estimated in 4 to 5 minutes. Chris glanced at his oxygen display. 26 minutes remaining. "Understood, Commander. Protocol is clear, Shaw." "You are ordered to abandon this rescue attempt immediately. This species has no diplomatic status with Earth. Return to transport now." The small airlock beside Chris cycled open, revealing a vial of iridescent blue fluid Iridian blood. "With respect, Commander, I need 10 more minutes." "That's a direct order, Shaw." Chris carefully extracted the vial. "Acknowledged, sir." He turned back to the access panel, applying the blue fluid to what appeared to be a receptor node. The panel responded immediately, previously dark circuits illuminating with pulsing blue light. The panel slid open, revealing crystalline components arranged in geometric patterns. "Karina, I'm in. What now?" Her voice came through, steady despite her fear. "The crystals must be realigned in sequence. Start with the central node, then outer ring clockwise, then..." Chris followed her instructions, manipulating the delicate crystals. As he completed the sequence, the panel emitted a high-pitched tone. "That's wrong," Karina said. The quarantine system, the entire hull section, began to vibrate violently. Chris nearly lost his grip, saved only by his magnetic boots. Alarms flashed across his helmet display. "The standard protocols aren't working," he transmitted. "The damage is too extensive." His oxygen reserve indicator now read 18 minutes. Behind him, he could see the transport ships running lights. Soon they would need to retreat to avoid the incoming asteroid. Chris made a split-second decision, disconnecting a power coupling from his life support system. "I'm going to try something." He connected his suit power directly to the Iridian circuitry. The energy surge created a momentary system disruption that rippled through the ship. Inside, Karina saw the quarantine doors seal flicker. For 3 precious seconds, the locking mechanism weakened. She threw herself against it repeatedly, managing to create a small gap not enough to enter, but enough to slide an emergency medical device through to her son. "I've reached him," she transmitted. "The medical stabilizer is working, but his neural system will begin failing in 20 minutes without proper treatment." Chris's oxygen indicator blinked red. 15 minutes remaining. Commander Vega's voice returned. "Shaw, this is your final warning. The transport must retreat to safe distance in 10 minutes. After that, you're on your own." Chris worked frantically at the crystal array. 10 minutes is all I need, Commander." As he manipulated the final sequence, his suit's external sensors blared a warning. The asteroid fragment had changed trajectory, accelerated by a collision with smaller debris. It would impact in minutes, not 4 to 5. "No time," Chris whispered. He reached for his suit's power cell, a small fusion module designed to power emergency equipment. With practiced movements, he disconnected it from his suit and connected it directly to the Iridian emergency override. The power surge was immediate and catastrophic. Every system in the Iridian vessel reset simultaneously as the energy overwhelmed the circuitry. Inside, all doors slid open, including the quarantine compartment. Karina rushed inside, gathering her unconscious son Talith in her arms, cradling him against her scaled chest. Outside, Chris floated motionless, his suit systems completely dead. No oxygen flow, no maneuvering capability, no communications. Through his viewport, he could see the massive asteroid fragment approaching, now visible to the naked eye. The transport ship's engines flared bright against the blackness, Commander Vega facing an impossible choice: retreat immediately or lose both vessels and all hands aboard. Adrift on the hull of the alien ship, Chris Shaw stared at the approaching devastation, his suit's emergency systems struggling to activate their last resort protocols. His suit's emergency systems struggled to activate their last resort power cells, but failed. Darkness crept in around the edges of Chris's vision as his oxygen levels plummeted. The cold seeped through his suit, first into his fingertips, then spreading up his arms. He clung to the hull, watching the asteroid grow larger against the starfield. Inside the Iridian vessel, Karina clutched Talith to her chest. His scales felt cool against her arms, dangerously cool. His shallow breathing barely registered as she sprinted through the corridors toward the medical bay, her four-toed feet slapping against the deck plating. "Stay with me," she whispered in her native tongue, the words emerging as musical clicks. The corridor ahead suddenly illuminated with pulsing blue emergency lighting. Karina faltered, momentarily confused. The ship's automated systems had detected the imminent collision and activated the isolated backup power Greta failsafe, separated from the main systems during the initial damage. She felt a slight vibration beneath her feet as minimal life support functions initiated throughout the vessel. It wasn't much, but it meant the medical bay might have enough power to save her son. On the bridge of the human transport ship, Commander Vega watched the tactical display with narrowed eyes. The massive asteroid fragment tumbled toward the disabled Iridian vessel, preceded by a cloud of smaller debris. Protocol dictated immediate retreat. The lives of his crew against 2 aliens and a technician who disobeyed direct orders. His mind focused. Extend deflector shields around the Iridian vessel. The tactical officer's head snapped up. "Sir, that will compromise our defensive capabilities by 4 to 7%. "Did I stutter, Lieutenant?" Vega's voice remained level. "And prepare EVA Unit 2. Lieutenant Hoffman, report to the airlock immediately." The communications officer relayed the order. Seconds later, James Hoffman's voice came through the bridge speakers. "Sir, Shaw's stranded on the Iridian hull. His suit's dead. Get out there and bring him back." "Yes, sir." Vega turned to his tactical officer. "How long can we maintain the shield extension?" 7 minutes at full strength. After that, structural integrity becomes questionable. Vega nodded once. "Deploy defensive drones. Target the incoming asteroid with mining lasers." Chris's fingers loosened their grip on the hull. His lungs burned. Each desperate breath pulled nothing but depleted air from his suit's circulation system. The stars seemed to pulse in rhythm with his fading heartbeat. With the last remnants of his coordination, he reached for the emergency beacon on his left wrist. The small backup battery remained functional even when all other systems failed, a final lifeline. His numbed fingers fumbled with the switch, finally activating it. The small device began pulsing, broadcasting its distinctive electromagnetic signature into the void. His hand dropped back to the hull, strength gone. His vision narrowed to a small tunnel of light surrounded by encroaching darkness. Lieutenant Hoffman launched from the transport ship's airlock, his advanced EVA suit's thrusters responding instantly to his inputs. The heads-up display highlighted Chris's position on the Iridian hull and tracked the incoming debris field. "I've got Shaw's beacon," he reported, navigating through the debris field with practiced precision. Small rocks bounced off his reinforced suit as he pushed his thrusters to maximum output. 4 minutes until primary impact, Commander Vega's voice replied in his ear. "Our shields won't hold against the main mass." Hoffman didn't respond, focusing instead on his approach vector. The Iridian ship grew larger in his vision, its sleek, organic lines marred by impact damage. He spotted a motionless figure clinging to the hull, Chris, head slumped forward, legs drifting in the vacuum. Reaching Chris's position, Hoffman grasped his colleague's suit, finding him unresponsive. Chris's face behind the helmet visor appeared ashen, lips tinged blue. Hoffman quickly attached an emergency oxygen feed to Chris's suit intake valve and secured a tether between them. "Got him," Hoffman transmitted. "He's unconscious. No time to return to our ship." His gaze fixed on a secondary airlock 20 meters along the Iridian hull. moving to their portside entry point. Hoffman fired his maneuvering thrusters, propelling both of them toward the airlock. The combined mass made steering difficult, but he compensated with short, controlled bursts. They reached the airlock with 3 minutes to spare. Hoffman examined the external control panel, finding it shattered by debris impact. The exposed circuitry sparked weakly in the vacuum. "Access panels destroyed," he reported, pulling his emergency toolkit from his belt. Attempting manual override. The alien technology resisted his efforts. Nothing in his training had prepared him for Iridian circuitry, with its crystalline components and bioelectric interfaces. Each attempt failed as valuable seconds ticked away. In the medical bay, Karina placed Talith on a treatment platform. The diagnostic system hummed to life, scanning her son's body. The results appeared on the console in glowing Iridian script. Core temperature, 32 degrees C. Neural pathway disruption detected. Metabolic functions failing. Karina initiated the emergency warming protocol. The platform glowed with gentle heat, but the power indicators remained dangerously low. A warning flashed across the screen. Insufficient power for complete treatment cycle. Neurological damage imminent without full restoration within 10 minutes. A separate alert caught her attention. The ship's external sensors detected 2 human biosignatures outside the secondary airlock. The system displayed their vital signs, one strong, one critically weak. Karina's fingers flew across the console, accessing the ship's remaining functional systems. She understood immediate live human who had saved her son was dying, and his companion sought entry. She activated the manual override for the airlock. As Hoffman worked frantically with his bypass tools, the airlock suddenly cycled open. He didn't question the unexpected assistance, dragging Chris's limp form inside. The outer door sealed and atmosphere hissed into the chamber. Once pressure equalized, Hoffman removed Chris's damaged helmet. Chris's face was pale, lips blue. He wasn't breathing. The inner door slid open, revealing Karina. She gestured urgently for Hoffman to follow, leading him back to the medical bay where Talith lay on one of 2 treatment platforms. Hoffman carried Chris's unconscious form, laying him on the second platform when Karina indicated he should do so. The medical console displayed both patients' vital signs. Talith's condition had stabilized but remained critical. Chris showed minimal brain activity, his oxygen-starved cells shutting down. Karina studied the power distribution readout. The ship's computer calculated that splitting the available energy between both platforms would result in treatment failure for both patients. Hoffman's communicator crackled. "Lieutenant," Commander Vega's voice came through, "deflector shields failing. We've fragmented the largest portion, but significant chunks remain on collision course. We need to retreat. 3 minutes until impact." "Sir," Hoffman began. "We'll return for survivors as soon as possible," Vega cut him off. "Find any way to increase your survival chances." Karina made her decision. She accessed a remote terminal, entering a series of commands. A hidden compartment in her quarters unlocked. The screen displayed an object Hoffman didn't recognize, a glowing, crystalline sphere housed in an ornate metallic casing. Karina's translator produced stilted English as she worked. "Diplomatic Corps, forbidden technology, will face punishment." She entered her authorization code. The medical bay lights brightened as fresh power surged through the systems. Both treatment platforms now operated at full capacity, their indicators shifting from red to green. Chris's vital signs began to stabilize. Color returned to his face as the system forced oxygen into his bloodstream and stimulated his cardiovascular system. Beside him, Talith's warming procedure accelerated, his neural patterns growing stronger. Hoffman assessed their situation. "We need to move the ship." Karina displayed a schematic on the main screen, highlighting 3 partially functional maneuvering thrusters on the vessel's starboard side. "Propulsion control," she pointed to a location on the map. "Through damaged sections, hull compromised." If we redirect those thrusters, we might clear the impact path, Hoffman said, studying the diagram. How long will they be stable? He gestured to the patients. Karina checked the readouts. 10 minutes to complete critical treatment. Impact in 12 minutes. She handed Hoffman a data crystal containing her command codes. These will grant access. Hoffman nodded, moving toward the door. He glanced back at Chris, whose eyes fluttered open briefly. Though unable to speak, Chris's gaze locked with Hoffman's for a momentous silent acknowledgement of understanding. Talith stirred as well, his small three-fingered hand reaching weakly toward his mother. Karina stood between the two treatment platforms, one scaled hand resting on her son's arm, the other touching Chris's shoulder, a bridge between species. Hoffman stepped into the corridor, the ship's schematic displayed on his suit's wrist unit. He broke into a run toward the damaged sections of the vessel, navigating through increasingly precarious passages. Ahead, a buckled bulkhead partially blocked his path, beyond which lay the propulsion control system, their only chance of survival. Hoffman sprinted through the increasingly unstable corridors of the Iridian vessel. Emergency lighting flickered overhead, casting eerie blue shadows across buckled bulkheads and exposed circuitry. Sparks erupted from damaged conduits as he passed, singeing his EVA suit's outer layer. "Status update," Commander Vega's voice crackled through his comms. "En route to propulsion control," Hoffman replied, his breathing labored. "Ship's more damaged than initial scans indicated." He ducked beneath a hanging mass of twisted metal and crystalline components. The ship's disorganic curves and semi-transparent materials contrasted sharply with human engineering. Each step took him deeper into sections progressively more damaged from the initial impact. 6 minutes to primary asteroid impact, Vega informed him. Hoffman reached a junction where the corridor split. The schematic on his wrist display indicated propulsion control lay to the right. As he turned, the floor beneath him groaned. Metal stressed beyond its limits gave way, forcing him to leap backward as a section collapsed. "Pathway blocked," he reported. "Rerouting." The alternative route required him to crawl through a maintenance tunnel clearly designed for smaller Iridian technicians. He removed his bulkier equipment pieces, attaching them to his belt before squeezing into the narrow passage. Jagged metal scraped against his suit as he inched forward. In the medical bay, Chris's eyes opened fully for the first time since his rescue. The ceiling above him pulsed with soft blue light. He tried to speak, but his throat burned with each breath. "Don't move," Karina instructed, her translator converting the musical clicks of her language to halting English. "Oxygen levels still stabilizing in your system." Chris turned his head slightly, seeing Talith on the adjacent platform. The young Iridian scales had regained some of their iridescence, his chest rising and falling in a more regular pattern. "How long?" Chris managed, his voice barely audible. 18 minutes since rescue, Karina replied, adjusting something on the console between them. "Treatment protocols effective but incomplete." Despite her warning, Chris pushed himself to a sitting position. The room spun briefly before his vision stabilized. "I can help," he said, each word stronger than the last. "I have cross-species emergency medical training." Karina tilted her head, the gesture remarkably human-like despite her alien features. "You should rest. There's no time." Chris swung his legs over the edge of the platform. "Your son needs specialized care, and I know techniques that might help." He moved to Talith's side, studying the medical readouts. Though the interface was unfamiliar, the biometric data followed universal principles. He pointed to patterns in the neural activity display. "Your system's compensating for oxygen deprivation to his brain tissue, but the recovery rate could be improved. If we adjust the electrolyte balance here," he indicated a section of the display, "and implement a modified version of Williams' protocol for rapid cellular regeneration." Karina hesitated momentarily before accessing the controls. Together, They made precise adjustments to the treatment parameters, combining Chris's knowledge of emergency medicine with Karina's understanding of iridian physiology. These modifications will optimize power usage from your core, Chris explained, his professional training overriding his physical weakness. Both treatment platforms will function 20% more efficiently. As they worked, Talith's eyes fluttered open. His gaze found his mother first, then shifted to Chris. He spoke, his voice a series of soft clicks that Chris couldn't understand. Karina responded in their language before turning to Chris. He wants to know who you are. He has never seen a human before. Chris managed a small smile. Tell him I'm a friend. On the bridge of the human transport ship, Commander Vega stood before a communications display showing the stern face of Admiral Kessler. You are ordered to retreat immediately, Commander, the Admiral stated. Protocol 17B is explicit in situations involving uncontained asteroid debris. You will not risk your vessel or crew for non-critical personnel. Vega glanced at his tactical display, watching as the massive asteroid fragments tumbled toward their position. With respect, Admiral, I'm experiencing communication difficulties. Your transmission is breaking up. Vega, I know exactly what you're doing. This is a direct order. Vega reached forward and terminated the connection. Communications appear to be malfunctioning. Log that for repair. He turned to his tactical officer. Deploy all survey drones and reconfigure for debris mapping and targeting solution calculations. Sir, that's against. Did I stutter, Lieutenant? Vega's tone remained level but brooked no argument. No, sir. The tactical officer's fingers flew across her console. Deploying drones now. Weapons systems. Lane-clearing lasers online, sir. They're designed for small debris removal, not combat applications. Reconfigure for maximum focus on singular points. We don't need to vaporize these rocks, just break them into manageable pieces. The bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency despite the irregularity of their orders. Outside, 20 survey drones launched from the transport's underbelly, spreading into a three-dimensional grid around the ship. Their sensors began mapping the approaching asteroid field, identifying the largest fragments and calculating optimal firing solutions. Position us between the Iridian vessel and the primary debris field, Vega ordered. Maximum safe distance but within effective weapons range. The helmsman executed the maneuver, bringing the transport ship into a protective position. The tactical display updated, showing their new configuration relative to the incoming threat. Shields at maximum capacity, the operations officer reported. But they weren't designed for this kind of punishment, sir. Vega nodded once. Noted. Begin targeting the largest fragments. Hoffman reached a section where the hull had been completely breached. Before him yawned a 10-meter gap of open space, the stars visible beyond. The opposite section contained the entrance to propulsion control, but reaching it seemed impossible. His suit's display indicated 8 minutes remaining before primary impact. Small pieces of debris from the approaching asteroid cloud had already begun striking the ship's outer hull, creating metallic pings that echoed through the structure. Each impact sent vibrations through the deck plating beneath his feet. Hoffman assessed his options. His EVA suit's thrusters retained approximately 30% capacity, enough for one controlled burst in zero gravity. The gap wasn't large by space standards, but one miscalculation would send him drifting into the void. He secured every piece of equipment, checked his tether, and activated his helmet's sealed mode. The corridor behind him automatically sealed as pressure began venting from his section. When the atmosphere had completely evacuated, he positioned himself at the edge of the breach. Making jump to propulsion control, he reported to Vega. EVA thrusters at minimum capacity. Acknowledged, Vega replied. Our weapons are engaging the larger fragments now. You have maybe 7 minutes before significant impacts begin. Hoffman took 3 measured steps back, then launched himself forward, activating his thrusters at the precise moment he cleared the breach. The controlled burn propelled him across the void, his trajectory aimed slightly above his target to account for the pull toward the mass. As he sailed across the gap, a piece of debris the size of his fist struck the hull 5 meters to his right, sending a shower of crystalline fragments into his path. He twisted to avoid the larger pieces, his course adjustment consuming precious thruster fuel. The opposite opening approached rapidly. Hoffman extended his arms, fingers straining toward the edge. His momentum carried him forward but slightly off target. At the last moment, his right hand caught an exposed support beam. The impact sent pain shooting through his shoulder, but he held fast, pulling himself into the corridor beyond. Behind him, the void of space remained visible through the breach, stars occasionally obscured by passing debris. Hoffman reactivated his suit's atmospheric mode as the section repressurized. His display showed 6 minutes remaining. The propulsion control room lay just ahead, its entrance partially blocked by a collapsed support beam. Hoffman squeezed through the narrow opening, finding devastation beyond. The main control console had been completely destroyed, its crystalline components scattered across the deck. Exposed power conduits sparked dangerously near pools of leaking coolant. Hoffman accessed the auxiliary systems panel, its display flickering erratically. Using Karina's authorization codes, he bypassed the security protocols and examined the propulsion status. 3 starboard thrusters remained partially functional, but their control pathways had been severed in the initial impact. The schematic displayed on the panel showed the extent of the damage. Standard control systems were offline, leaving only one option: manual override requiring direct rewiring of the propulsion relays while simultaneously inputting command sequences. A job for 2 engineers working in tandem, now left to him alone with minutes remaining. Hoffman knelt beside the exposed relay junction, pulling tools from his belt. His suit's radiation sensors began warning of elevated levels leaking from damaged propulsion components. He ignored the alerts, focusing instead on the complex network of crystalline filaments and metallic conduits that comprised the Iridian propulsion system. "Beginning manual override," he reported. "This is going to be close to impossible." The complexity of the Iridian propulsion system, with its crystalline components and unfamiliar configuration, made the task daunting even with proper equipment and support. Working alone, with radiation alarms screaming and minutes until impact, bordered on futile. Yet he persisted, meticulously connecting bypass relays and rerouting power conduits. His hands moved with practiced precision despite the growing tremor in his fingers, first symptom of radiation exposure. "Lieutenant, status update." Vega's voice came through, tension evident despite the static. "Almost there," Hoffman grunted, splicing the final connection. "Activating manual thruster sequence now." He input the command codes Karina had provided, watching as the display flickered between Iridian symbols. The remaining functional thrusters began to power up, their energy signatures registering on his diagnostic tool. A violent shudder ran through the ship as the first thruster activated, pushing the vessel into a sluggish turn away from the approaching asteroid field. Hoffman allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before a warning klaxon interrupted his thoughts. The panel before him flashed urgent alerts. Power draw had destabilized the already damaged containment fields around the propulsion core. "Commander, I've got partial thrust operational," he reported. "Ship's beginning to move, but we've got a new problem." Containment fields failing around a blinding flash of light cut off his words as an energy surge ripped through the propulsion control room. Hoffman was thrown against the bulkhead, his helmet cracking against a support beam. The world around him dimmed as consciousness slipped away, radiation warnings blaring in his ears as he collapsed to the deck. Chris, Karina, and Talith stared at Lieutenant Hoffman's unconscious form as the ship shuddered violently around them. They had found him sprawled on the floor of propulsion control after following his emergency beacon signal. Radiation warnings flashed across his suit display, indicating dangerous exposure levels. "His vitals are dropping," Chris said, examining the bio readings on Hoffman's suit. "Without immediate intervention, he'll suffer permanent cellular damage." Chris reached into his emergency medical pouch standard issue for rescue technicians operating in potentially radioactive environments and extracted a compact radiation treatment injector. His hands trembled slightly, his own body still recovering from earlier trauma. "This might help stabilize him enough for transport," Chris said, administering the injection through a port in Hoffman's suit. "But we need to get him to proper medical facilities within 2 hours." The ship lurched beneath them, metal groaning as structural supports failed throughout the vessel. The computer's voice cut through the cacophony of alarms. "Structural integrity at 14%. Complete hull collapse estimated in 12 minutes. Emergency evacuation advised immediately." Karina swept her handheld device in a wide arc, scanning the surrounding area. "The nearest functional escape pod is 3 sections away in the tertiary evacuation bay," she reported, her translator converting her musical clicks into clipped English. "If we move now, we might reach it." Chris nodded, helping Karina assemble a makeshift stretcher from debris panels and secure Hoffman to it. Talith, now strong enough to walk unassisted after their medical intervention, clutched his portable medical unit with one hand and his mother's scaled fingers with the other. They moved through corridors lit only by emergency lighting, navigating around buckled floor plates and fallen ceiling panels. Behind them, sections of the ship began to collapse, the sounds of tearing metal echoing through the ship's skeleton. Chris and Karina carried Hoffman between them, his weight and the awkward stretcher slowing their progress. "The Diplomat's core power has dropped to 18%, Karina noted, glancing at her device. "Barely enough to maintain essential life support." 3 minutes to evacuation bay, she announced as they rounded a corner. Their path forward vanished beneath a tangled mass of structural supports and conduits that completely blocked the corridor. The ship's automated repair drones, severely reduced in number, struggled ineffectively to clear the obstruction. "There's no time," Chris said, checking Hoffman's vitals on his suit display. "Is there another route?" Karina's fingers danced across her device, her expression darkening. "The only alternative path would take us through the primary science laboratory, but that section was directly hit during the asteroid impact. Environmental readings show vacuum exposure in parts of that sector." Their communicators crackled with static before Commander Vega's voice broke through. "Shaw, do you read me? I've managed to reach the command shuttle. Currently approaching the Iridian vessel's starboard emergency airlock. Can you get there in 8 minutes? Chris examined the ship's schematic displayed on Karina's device. "The starboard airlock is beyond the collapsed section. We'd need to find another way around." "Wait," Talith interjected, his voice small but clear. "The maintenance tunnels. Mother, remember when you showed me how the repair crews navigate during flight?" Karina's eyes widened. "He's right. The maintenance tunnels run parallel to the main corridors. They're narrow, but should accommodate us if we proceed single file." Chris immediately located a maintenance access panel in the nearby wall. He pried it open with his utility tool, revealing a cramped tunnel illuminated by strips of emergency lighting. Without hesitation, he entered first, crawling forward and pulling the makeshift stretcher with Hoffman behind him. Karina helped Talith in before following, sealing the panel behind them. The tunnel constricted their movement, forcing them to advance on hands and knees. For Chris, with his broader shoulders, certain sections required him to turn sideways and inch forward. The stretcher scraped against the tunnel walls, creating a metal-on-metal screech that set their teeth on edge. "Structural integrity at 9%, the computer's disembodied voice announced through wall-mounted speakers. Main power grid failure imminent. Estimated survival time, 7 minutes. They pressed forward through the claustrophobic passage until reaching a section where the walls had buckled inward. A gap barely 20 centimeters wide blocked their path too narrow for Chris and Hoffman's stretcher to pass through. "We'll have to go back," Chris said, his voice tight with urgency. "No time," Karina responded firmly. She reached for her belt and removed a small cylindrical device. "Stand back." The device expanded in her hand, forming a circular frame. Karina placed it against the narrowest part of the passageway and activated it. A low-frequency pulse emanated from the device, causing the surrounding metal to vibrate. With visible effort, she pushed against the walls, which yielded several crucial centimeters. "Iridian emergency structural manipulation tool," she explained, noting Chris's surprised expression. "Another technology we don't share. Quickly now, the effect lasts only 30 seconds. They squeezed through the widened section, Chris carefully maneuvering Hoffman's stretcher through the gap moments before the walls snapped back to their original position. The ship lurched violently, throwing them against the tunnel walls as systems failed throughout the vessel. Finally, they reached another access panel that, according to Karina's device, opened near the starboard emergency airlock. Chris kicked it open and helped the others out into a corridor bathed in blinking red emergency lights. The airlock stood 20 meters ahead, but between them and safety, a large section of ceiling had collapsed. Electrical fire sparked among the debris, and the thinning atmosphere made each breath more difficult than the last. 2 minutes to complete hull failure, the computer announced with mechanical indifference. Through a viewport beside the airlock, they spotted Commander Vega's command shuttle maneuvering into position, its docking mechanism extending toward the Iridian vessel. Chris and Karina dragged Hoffman's stretcher over the debris while Talith followed, his breathing labored in the thinning air. Reaching the airlock, Karina frantically input her authorization code, but the panel remained dark. "No power to the airlock mechanism," she said, panic edging into her voice. Chris located the manual override and attempted to activate it, but the handle was jammed from external damage. He wedged his utility tool into the mechanism and applied his full weight. The handle snapped off in his hand as another violent tremor shook the ship. "Computer, time to structural failure," Karina asked. 90 seconds to complete hull collapse." Vega's voice came through their communicators. "I can see you through the viewport. The shuttle's docking clamps can't establish a secure connection with your damaged airlock. I'll have to breach it from my side." "There's no time for a proper breach," Chris responded, eyeing a new crack spreading across the corridor ceiling. "The ship's breaking apart around us." A moment of silence followed before Vega spoke again, his voice resolute. "Stand clear of the inner airlock door. I'm going to use the shuttle's mining laser to cut through. It's not designed for this, but it's our only option." They retreated from the airlock as a bright orange beam appeared around the door's perimeter. The laser moved methodically, cutting through the reinforced metal and showering the corridor with sparks as it completed its circuit. 30 seconds to hull failure, the computer warned. The inner airlock door, now completely severed from its frame, remained stubbornly in place. Chris threw his shoulder against it, but the door didn't budge. Karina joined him, then even Talith pushed with all his strength. The door shifted slightly but refused to fall. 20 seconds. With a final, desperate effort, Chris and Karina rammed the door simultaneously. It toppled forward with a resounding crash, revealing the airlock chamber beyond. They quickly dragged Hoffman inside, Talith following closely. Inner door clear. Vega's voice came through clearly now. "I'm cutting through the outer door now." The mining laser reappeared, slicing through the outer airlock door as alarms blared throughout the dying Iridian vessel. Around them, the ship's structural supports began to give way with terrifying finality. Catastrophic hull failure imminent. 10 seconds, the computer announced, its mechanical voice a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding around them. The laser completed its circuit just as the ship began breaking apart. The outer door remained stubbornly in place, held by a single connecting point the laser had missed. Air rushed toward the weakened seal, threatening to pull them into the vacuum of space. Karina pushed Talith behind her and lunged forward. Using her full body weight, she slammed into the door precisely at the remaining connection point. The door broke free, tumbling out into space. The sudden decompression caught Karina, pulling her outward before she could grab a handhold. Chris reacted instantly, diving forward and catching her wrist as she was dragged toward the void. His other hand gripped a protruding piece of the airlock frame, his muscles straining as he held them both against the powerful suction of vacuum. Behind them, Talith screamed his mother's name, anchoring himself to Hoffman's stretcher. "Hold on," Commander Vega shouted through the comms, maneuvering the shuttle closer until its open docking port aligned with the breached airlock. The edges didn't match perfectly, but Vega activated the shuttle's emergency magnetic seals, creating an imperfect but functional air bridge between the vessels. The decompression force lessened as the shuttle's atmosphere flowed into the breach. Chris pulled Karina back inside, and together they dragged Hoffman's stretcher across the makeshift bridge into the command shuttle. Talith followed, clutching his portable medical unit. The moment they were aboard, Vega sealed the shuttle's hatch and fired the engines at maximum thrust. Through the viewport, they watched as the Iridian vessel disintegrated, breaking into thousands of fragments. The diplomatic corps released a final pulse of energy as it destabilized, creating a brilliant flash that momentarily illuminated the shuttle's interior. "Cutting it rather close, wouldn't you say?" Vega remarked dryly as he piloted them away from the debris field. His uniform showed burns and tears from his own ordeal aboard the transport ship, but his hands remained steady on the controls. "The evacuation pods from your ship?" Chris asked, helping Karina secure Hoffman to the shuttle's medical berth. "All launched successfully. Rescue beacons active," Vega replied, activating the shuttle's automated medical system. "The interstellar emergency response cruiser Horizon should reach them within 3 hours." He checked the navigation display, his expression growing more serious. "We, however, are much farther from established shipping lanes. The Horizon won't reach our position for at least 18 hours.